So we have a wonderful session planned for the audience today, and I have two distinguished guests here. We have Dr. Laura Collins and Dr. Cedric DeHue, and they're going to go ahead and introduce themselves, and then I'll just kind of set the stage for how we're going to do this session. But go ahead, Dr. Collins, and introduce yourself, and then Cedric. Okay, Dr.
Well,
Collins, are you?
hello everyone, and thank you so much, Tanaga, for that introduction. My name is Laura Collins. I am the patent agent at North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro, North Carolina, largest HBCU in the nation. I have been here helping our research faculty patent their inventions and find corporate partners for them for 11 years now. Prior to that, I spent about 10 years working as a sidekick to an IP attorney, sort of learning the ropes. Because my background is in chemistry. I actually did my graduate work just down the road in Chapel Hill and am delighted to be back in the Tar Heel State.
Thank you, Laura and Cedric.
Thank you so much, Naga, and good to talk to you, Laura, as well. And so my background is that, currently I'm patent counsel for Eli Lilly and Company, a large pharmaceutical company. And I had a similar background in chemistry. Worked at a generic pharmaceutical company, and then after getting a master's degree and a JD, then worked at a law firm for a few years before starting my own. Then I did the PhD, did it out of order, and ended up at Lilly at the start of this year.
Oh, wow, that is cool. So why don't we just call ourselves C cubed, right? We're all chemists. I didn't even realize that when we were in our sessions. How cool is that? So actually, I am Tanaga Boozer, and so I serve as the Scientific Technology Transfer Coordinator for the Agricultural Research Service. It's a USDA agency. Really cool. I'm responsible for tech transfer activities at about 27 locations in the Southeast. My region is goes from North Carolina down to Florida, Puerto Rico, and to the west, Louisiana. Um, our researchers there are working a lot with innovative companies, small companies. Some of you may not know that, but they work a lot with SBIR recipients. It's a really cool opportunity. So I'm just going to put my plug in there for the USDA. It's a wonderful agency to work with, especially for small startups and for small innovative companies working in the area of agriculture. But it's not about me today. I have two distinguished guests here that are going to share their expertise with you. We have a little housekeeping tips. I know we're not using the chat feature, but if you have any questions, feel free to email inventioncon@uspto.gov at any point. The way we're going to do our session is I'm going to start off with some questions, have Laura and Cedric answer those questions. We have about 3 different segments to this session. At the end of each segment, I will actually look to see if we have any questions. I'll take your questions. We'll try to respond to those and just keep it moving for the next, 40 or 50 minutes. So why don't I go ahead and start with Laura? I know we all know this, but it's just good to make sure that we're all on the same page. So why don't you just define what is tech transfer for us? I know it's simple, but go ahead and take it from
Sure,
there.
it really is the transfer of rights to use or to commercialize intellectual property that's been developed at one party and is being used by a different party. So that is what the Association of University Technology Managers, Autumn, would say. For a university, really, tech transfer arose out of the Bayh-Dole Act in 1980, when our federal government, who was giving a lot of federal research dollars to universities, saw that the great work that was being done on our institutions wasn't making it into the marketplace. There were certainly a number of successes, but it wasn't the rate at which new technology was being developed. And so the Bayh-Dole Act sort of took that under consideration and said, hey, how about if the universities maintain ownership of IP, of research that's being done with these federal dollars, and with the people on the ground, like myself, paying attention to what's going on campuses, there'll be an opportunity to find and patent that technology, and also to find corporate partners who admittedly are much better about moving something into the marketplace than a university campus is.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that. Okay. So what does tech transfer actually in your day job for universities, right? What does it really mean? Like, how are you helping and assisting folks at the university?
Sure. So we have a range of faculty who are engaged in tech transfer at different points. So I have to confess, as a patent agent, I often think of intellectual property as something that is patentable. But certainly throughout the course of, and of course, our sponsor is the US Patent and Trademark Office. And so it's important to remember that the useful intellectual property includes both trademark as well as copyright. In addition, there's trade secrets that can be useful in the commercial setting. So my job here on campus is to work with faculty to identify that technology which has commercial relevance. So again, we're doing a lot of really interesting research. Not all of that is directly transferable into the marketplace. And so what we're trying to do is tease out that work that has commercial relevance and then help the faculty get a patent, which we'll get to, and there's been other presentations today, is an effective business tool. And so we want to make sure that we have that tool when we reach out to partners to say, hey, would you like to look at this technology, evaluate it, see if it's aligned with your business interests, and move that into the marketplace? Because again, our faculty have many skills, but running a business, and certainly at a university, that's not what we do.
Okay, all right, Laura, that was a great answer. And I'm not trying to be funny here, not trying to put you on the spot. But is tech transfer really about just getting patents and hanging plaques on the wall for your faculty? Is that what it's all about?
Absolutely not. And when I was talking about having a range of faculty, so we have faculty who are specifically looking at um, these cutting edge problems that are relevant again to the marketplace. They're already partnering with small businesses, sometimes large businesses, sometimes federal agencies such as yourself, that are looking to how we can improve the life of our citizens. And again, like I said, sometimes that research we're doing is really fundamental. And so the faculty are years away from having a commercial embodiment of their research. And so what I try to do is sort of help faculty evaluate where in that spectrum are they. But for those that have that commercial focus, right, a patent is, while a very nice plaque to hang on the wall, they're quite lovely. Really, it's a tool and it helps engage in the conversation with our corporate partners and gives them a sense of confidence in terms of an external validation that the technology we're presenting is novel and non-obvious.
Excellent. Okay, and why don't we go ahead and shift the focus to Cedric. Cedric, what does tech transfer actually mean for industry? We know that it's invaluable for universities and small businesses, but what about large privately owned organizations like yours, Lilly?
Yeah, thank you, Tanaga. And I applaud Laura. She did an excellent job of covering tech transfer offices for universities and correspondingly mentioning that patents are a tool and not the end goal, which I know we'll get to later. For industry, you can see that there's a real advantage of taking the research and development, especially the ones that have a commercial focus, and being able to in-license that information into industry in order to bring a product or a service into the marketplace, which is what, the ultimate goal. And so in parts of industry, most parts of industry may not have their own research and development department. They may just have products or services that have worked. And now they're looking for other opportunities or they're looking for improvements and things of that nature. And so it can be very beneficial for them to take someone else's research and development, transfer that knowledge, and be able to put something out into the market from there. So that's really the role of industry. Even in areas where you have industries that have a lot of R&D, such as pharmaceutical industry, there may be opportunities where there's something outside of what the pharmaceutical companies are doing that may be beneficial for them to in-license and then move to get a product out into the market. So there is definitely a role for tech transfer in industry as well.
Okay, so all right, I'm at a federal lab, and I know how important it is, how important tech transfer is at federal labs. But what about from your perspective? Are your faculty members and folks at your organization working with federal labs at all? Is that a important relationship for universities and industry?
Certainly for universities it is. There's a great collaboration that can happen in terms of knowledge. So these cross-pollination between federal lab that's focused on a project, bringing in some external expertise from our university that maybe, out of researchers that have been working on an adjacent problem, and they find that partnership comes together really nicely. The other thing is resources, right? So cross-pollinating those resources. You may have, I call them toys, you may call them multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment that you can, that your researchers use to do their research. And sometimes our faculty can use those and not necessarily buy them one for their own. And similarly, we may have resources that can be brought to bear on problems that your researchers are addressing. It's a great opportunity.
Excellent. Cedric?
Yeah, sorry, I'm taking myself off mute so you don't hear all of the kids running around in the background. So yes,
No,
definitely there are advantages, and Laura made mention of a number of good things. Also, I've had some clients back when I was at my own practice. I had one particular client who looked into getting licensing from federal agencies because he wanted to make sure that his platform technology had as many applications as possible. He really wanted to make sure that he had the broadest scope for the market that he was seeking to enter. And so he found that to be very valuable. He found the process, especially with federal labs, to get licensing was easier than doing so sometimes with industry, other parts of industry. And so that was definitely something that he found beneficial. And I thought it was a great idea too. He said that these things are just out there waiting to be utilized. And so, getting that licensing from federal agencies, he found to be very beneficial. And it helped him to gain more knowledge about the market that he wanted to enter with his platform.
excellent. That's an excellent point, Cedric. I love the point about licensing. So I think what we've done so far is just kind of laid the foundation for what is tech transfer, how you can get involved, and who's actually involved, right? Universities, industry, federal labs, startups, small businesses. That's kind of setting the stage. We're going to move to the next section in just a bit into commercialization. Now that you have an innovation, you're interested, you're looking at the market, you kind of have an idea what you want to do. Let's figure out how we do that. But before we do that, I just have to say this because when I used to work at the patent office and out in industry in all parts, and even at the university, I would hear folks just focus a lot on just the patent, just the piece, right? Just that innovation. But I think it's important for our audience to understand the scope, the breadth of technology transfer. So that's my next question. Why is it important for entrepreneurs to actually understand the entire landscape and not just focus on one piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that, Tanaga. And I would say that, as Laura already mentioned, the Bayh-Dole Act, it's now a very good, well-worn path to commercialization. There's a lot of opportunity. A lot of universities have tech transfer offices. And so, actually we have a comment here about how do you connect with the tech transfer office or find them in your area. And yeah, that's a great question to ask because if you have that ability to reach out to a university, especially a tech transfer office within a university, even if you may not be affiliated with that university, there are a number of universities that have that interest in working with people in the community and can assist you in that way. So, Laura is going to be better suited to answer that particular question. In terms of entrepreneurs and understanding tech transfer, there's a lot of opportunity to obtain knowledge. Laura is an expert in tech transfer lingo and terminology, and so she may and other tech transfer offices may have resources, including money sometimes, that's possible, and definitely could give you good feedback as to having a different perspective, understanding tech transfer and how you could take your idea and help move that idea along to the market. Having someone in tech transfer who can be your advisor in that role is very helpful.
So Laura, you want to just kind of jump in on that one, or should we just see if we have any
I
questions?
just want to chime in, and Cedric must think tech transfer offices have lots of money. I wasn't given that bag when I started working here at A&T, so I must have done my intake wrong when I came to the university. But what I will say is, the offices usually work well within our entrepreneurial support network, right? And I hope we'll have a chance to talk about that as well. And so in terms of a source of information, and to your point, Cedric, there are often opportunities to find information online. Our U.S. Patent Office is a great resource, and so I hope, Tanagi, you'll let us talk about that as well.
Oh, we'll absolutely talk about resources. I know there's another session, I think, coming up tomorrow on resources, but I think there's some unique resources that universities might have that might not come up tomorrow. So yes, we'll definitely revisit that at the end of the session. But okay, so we finished section 1 on tech transfer. I want to move to commercialization. But before I do, Sean, I just want to know if we have any questions from the audience before we move to our next session or section.
I did post one in the chat, and that was, how do I connect with the tech transfer office or find them in my area? Right now, we haven't had anything else come in.
Okay, all right, so then we'll just continue on and perhaps we'll generate some a topic or some interest from the audience on commercialization. So moving from tech transfer and defining what it is, now what can we do? How do we do it? All right, so Laura, I think I'm going to go back to you with the first question. What should entrepreneurs know about commercialization? What are those really cool, key, important elements of commercialization? What are those buzzwords that they need to know and understand in order to effectively commercialize?
So I would recommend that an inventor think about commercialization, which you might think of as at the end of the inventive process, sort of at the beginning. And there's certainly been examples. The panel right before us, and as well as our Shark Tank panel that was recorded earlier, made a really good point of solving problems, right? Inventors solve problems. They run into something, usually it's an annoying problem, and it's something they want to overcome, and then they think, hey, more people might want this. So that's that more people might want this, right, is an important step, because, and again, I do have the utmost respect for for all of my faculty, but some of them are working on things that don't have commercial applications. I will out myself as someone who did graduate work, and it has nothing to do with anything, because it was fundamental research that was necessary, but it was 20, 30 years from being able to be a commercially relevant kind of topic, right? So there's some fundamental work, and that's the advantage, I would argue, of our university system, is that there's this opportunity. So not everything is going to be commercially relevant, but inventing and getting a patent, right, is all about that commercial relevance. So I would encourage our inventors and our entrepreneurs to think about, okay, so I've got this problem. Who else has that problem? What does that market look like? Who's going to pay for this good or service that I have invented? And so definitely finding a solution to that problem that speaks to what other folks are going to be willing to pay for. And then also probably figuring out the pain point, or the price point, I should say, of the pain. Problem, but it may be $1 million solution, and it may only be $100 problem. And so again, for our inventors, there might be some order of magnitude difference, but you want to make sure that you're not coming up with a $10 solution to a 2-cent problem. And so knowing what that is, and knowing, again, to your point, Tanagi, you were talking about the landscape. Is there a 3-cent solution to that 2-cent problem somewhere close by? And what are you going to do about that relative to your $10 solution? And then I think also sort of understanding where in the pipeline your technology fits, right? Who's going to use the good or service, and also who's going to make or provide that good or service. So that entire pipeline, it seems a lot to sit down the very first time to think about it. But when you're going to go to someone like Cedric, and he's going to say, okay, what's your commercial embodiment? Where is the sweet spot? He's trying to look forward into the future so that you end up with a patent that has support for the technology that you're selling.
So that is really that's a real good way of explaining everything, Laura. And Cedric, you might jump in here. But what's so interesting is when we talk about commercialization, we just really say we've got this really cool thing that we're doing and we want to get it out there. Okay, so it almost sounds like we're defining a two-step process. Think of something really cool and then just get it out. But is there something in the middle? And what is that something? Are there points where we should help them define what we call in the tech transfer world, milestones? What are some of those key baby steps? Do we just go from patenting to commercialization, or do we start doing some little things in between? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about what some of those little things what they might be?
Sure, I'll jump in there, Tanaga, and I think it may work out well just because a number of the startups that I've worked with, I get involved pretty early on. You know, the point where they have the idea, maybe they've done a little bit of research on it so far, whether it's in the science realm and they have a manuscript that they're getting ready to submit to a journal for publication, and they want to file that provisional patent application, like the lady said, between the last two sessions, or you know, if they are at the point where they have their minimally viable product, they have their first product, because actually that's a part of patent law as well, as the actual reduction of practice is one of the two standards. Is if you actually have a version of this product, or have you actually started providing services and have all of this stuff laid out. So you know, you can have those milestones, those very early milestones that occur after the aha moment, but then you still have things like proof of concept. Can you show how you're going to work this into a product that can make it into the market? Do you have a minimally viable product? Have you had your first sale? Have you started the process of, you know, raising funds? You know, those could be two different paths. Or, you know, like the lady said before, you know, is someone going to take a license from you, you know, for your idea? And that's your royalty stream. That's your business model. So there are a number of milestones along the way that can be very helpful to talk through as you're preparing for commercialization.
Okay, actually, we do have a question from the audience. I think I'll stop now and take the question because it's a very, very interesting question, one that I would hear all the time. And I'm really interested to see how we're going to approach this question. Who owns the results of my working with a tech transfer office? Who owns the results of my working with a tech transfer? We can answer that in a lot of ways, but I'll go ahead, Laura, and I'll let you answer that, and I may chime in a little bit just based on my background with working with various tech transfer offices.
Sure, sure. So, according to employment law policy and the university policy, not specific employment law, but our policy, which is that employees of the university have to assign their IP to the university. And there are some nuances to that. The university doesn't necessarily want to own all of the intellectual property. We're trying to pick and choose. Again, those buckets of money seem to be missing from my office. You don't see any here. So I have to be a good steward of the finances that the university has to put forward towards patenting and commercialization. And we'll talk about that in a bit, that they're not always very cheap activities, inexpensive, certainly. In terms of external parties working with the university, usually universities aren't well positioned to help our community members specifically find partners for their technology. What we can be are resources in terms of connecting them, again, within those entrepreneurial support networks. Sometimes there is alignment between what an entrepreneur or a small business is doing in terms of their business interests and the research interests of our faculty. And that's probably where a partnership might come together. In that instance, if there's IP that's created, the university owns the portion of the IP that comes from our employee. Small businesses that are partnering, right, they own the portion of the IP that comes from their inventors. And so sometimes that does end up with joint ownership of something like a patent. So you will see two names listed as the assignee of an issued patent. It will be a university and a corporate partner. And I'll leave it to Cedric to get into the mess that can sometimes cause, but generally universities are excellent partners with companies. when we're just conveying information, that's the Tech Transfer Office is helping entrepreneurs plug into that entrepreneurial support network. There's no claim of IP. You're not using university resources to develop the technology. It's just a courtesy introduction to different opportunities in the community.
So, thank you, Laura. Thank you. I know I'm not a panelist, but I do want to chime in here because I think I have something really nice to offer the attendees that might be interested in working with the federal lab. If you don't know this, and if you hadn't heard this word before, please, please, please go and check it out. It's called CRADA. It's an acronym, Cooperative Research and Development Agreement. It is something special. If you hadn't heard about it, you should definitely go and dig and do your diligence to find out what it is. It is something that gives you a really nice position with working with the federal government. You can utilize all of our resources, all of the equipment that you might need that you don't have, that's way expensive for a small business to actually purchase. There's some really cool things. But the thing that I want to tell you about is the first right of refusal. That if you work, so don't worry about the ownership thing because we might co-own it, but the really cool thing is you get to license it. You are in a really good position to get all of this help from the federal lab. And then we return the technology right back to you so that you can go and do what you need to do it. So I won't go, on and on about a CRADA, but if you don't take anything away, just take that acronym, go to your computer, go to your internet, figure out if your research, your innovation is appropriate for working with a federal lab, find a federal lab because they're all over the country. Try to work with them, get what you need. It's a wonderful resource and it could probably cost you nothing at all. All right. So go ahead and check that out. And Cedric, did you want to chime in on the conversation?
Yeah, sure. I hope that we could also discuss, at least briefly, the difference between tech transfer and sponsored research, wherein industry could come to a university and then in a contract form say, here's our problem, university, I know you have expertise in this area, professor, PI, whoever. Can you solve this problem or address this problem for me? And under those contract terms, a lot of the time, industry may retain ownership of the intellectual property that comes out of the work that's being done. That's just, I need to put it out there. It's just another mechanism that is, similar to tech transfer, but because of the difference in ownership, I thought it was at least worth mentioning.
Yeah, so thanks, Cedric. Let me just add to small businesses and independent vendors, sometimes they get real nervous about that ownership and giving a little bit of that away. I would argue that it's okay to have a joint owner. If that is what you need to get the technology out, you shouldn't be so nervous about it, right? Because you can have a wonderful idea, but if you can't get to the next step and you absolutely need someone else to help you, and the exchange is a little bit of ownership, why not? Right? That's just my take on it. Certainly, talk to experts like Laura and Cedric and, get some, feedback from them. But I don't think small inventors should be gun shy about, working with others and giving up a little bit of ownership if they must, right? You don't just willingly give it up, but if you have to, why not? Okay, so if we don't have another question, Cedric, was the sponsor research question, the question from the audience?
No, that was me.
Okay, okay. So, all right, the next question we have here is actually commercialization. How do you actually prepare to commercialize? Is there something that you need to do? If I need a prototype, if I need to do a license deal, if I need to get my patent, what exactly do I need to do to prepare for commercialization? Laura, go ahead.
Right. The first thing that comes to mind as you ask that question, Tanaga, is to talk to people, right? And it's so difficult for any one person to have all of the answers. And while you may be an expert in and or have are on the exponential ramp to become an expert in a particular space, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have the expertise necessarily to hit a grand slam home run and be able to get that product onto Amazon or onto Whole Food shelves, like we heard about fresh paper. You really need to think about who do you need to partner with to be able to be successful. I would suggest actually that if you're looking at that commercialization arc, and we had talked about the many steps along the way, make sure that you're identifying what you see as your biggest challenges. And as scary as that is, sit and think about those scary challenges and write down some ideas. And the reason I'm going to suggest sitting with that scary stuff is because your partners are going to ask those same kinds of questions. And you don't necessarily need to have the answer, but you need to be able to assure those partners, be they financial backers or manufacturers, that you recognize that as a challenge and you're already thinking about it, so that you're giving them assurance that, like, I'm not just looking right here, I'm looking into the future. And the reason I'm looking into the future is I expect to get to that point because that will be the path to success. And I recognize this is a potential roadblock, and here's some ways that I'm thinking about getting around that roadblock, getting over that roadblock, sneaking underneath it, right? And sometimes that means you need to partner with someone, like, hey, I'm really good at this, but I need someone else to do that. So by the time I get to that roadblock, I plan on having the funding, or I plan on having the partnership that will help, from someone else who can help me get around there. Those are so yeah, talking with folks and just really sitting and thinking through the thing is what I would recommend to our
Oh,
attendees.
yes. Just talking to people, getting that feedback. Cedric,
I
any
agree
pointers?
wholeheartedly. Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with Laura, and especially thinking through, you can't have a single person who's going to understand all of the different parts of business, marketing, finance, operations, legal, regulatory. I mean, I could even just give you an example. We've kind of alluded to it so far, and I know some of the other sessions have talked about it, that patent is a right of exclusion, meaning that you have the right to keep others from doing something, but that doesn't necessarily give you the affirmative right to make or sell your good or your service. I mean, that may only come through a different regulatory body. And so you can't just rely on talking to a patent attorney because, oh, sorry, that's my thing. You can't just rely on talking to a patent attorney because a patent attorney may not know your regulatory environment and may not be able to walk you through that process. I've been practicing for 16 years and now joining a pharmaceutical company, I'm just now learning about all of the additional exclusivities that are required and need to be considered from the FDA. So, you really do need a village, a number of people who can assist you.
Excellent. So this is going to sound like a really kind of simple or stupid question, but I've got to ask it because I think there's something to it. And the question is money the most important resource? I know small companies and innovators are always looking for money as if that's the biggest hurdle. So tell me, panelists, is it the biggest hurdle? Is money the most important resource source when you're trying to, invent something spectacular and get it out in the market?
I
Who
can
wants to take
go.
that?
Yes,
Go
I'll
ahead,
take it.
Cedric.
This is one of my soapboxes. I've got several soapboxes, so this is definitely one of them. Yet money is not the most important. Definitely knowledge is the most important thing to gain. And with knowledge, as Laura alluded to earlier with the Shark Tank session, you can have a great idea and the money will come. It's rare that you have the reverse, where you have a terrible idea and money still comes. So, you really need to prioritize more than anything else knowledge, and what it comes in all different forms, from the different perspectives of individuals who can help you in different parts of your process, to feedback that you can receive when you're having those conversations. You really want to gain knowledge more than anything else.
All right, Laura, did you want to take a stab at that one as well?
I'm going to agree with Cedric on his soapbox, right? money can often help, right? But it will not solve all of the problems. It will not even identify all of the challenges that you have. And you really need that awareness. And so to his point, making sure you have connectivity within a community that can help you think about the challenges as well as thinking about solutions of those challenges. And again, I'm plugging an entrepreneurial support network here in Greensboro. There's a lot of churn around the support of our entrepreneurs, recognizing the value that they bring to communities such as ours in terms of doing some homegrown businesses. And so there are a lot of organizations that are set up to start helping folks at the business creation idea, right? I think I have a business idea. What can I do? How can I move along? I think I have a product. What can I do? How can I move along? And so oftentimes this knowledge, this awareness of how to plug into these different communities, be it through maker spaces, be it through chambers of commerce that have entrepreneurial support programs, be it through our small business development centers that are focused on supporting these small businesses, trying to find that funding. So you can't do it without money. Rarely is there an entrepreneur who has a success story that didn't gather money from friends and family or mortgage their own house, or there was a story earlier today of someone who raided their child's college fund because
Oh,
of the belief in their product and the ability to move that forward. Luckily, that ended well. So yeah, so money's needed, but you really want to be smart about how you're using it, because there are lots of opportunities to spend it, and you don't always need to be spending money. Sometimes what you need to be doing, to Cedric's point, is spending time, spending efforts to identify where those resources are for you.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. Those are great answers. Of course, when I asked the question, I knew and I understand that money is an important resource, but I do think there are many free resources like what I mentioned, working with Federal Labs, where they have a lot of equipment and things that they can offer for free and experts that can help you for free. So I just want folks to know that there are available resources and cash isn't the only thing that you need. And as a matter of fact, just like such knowledge, expertise, those are, valuable things that you need, and sometimes even more than just the amount of money that you're looking to raise. So we've got lots of questions in the chat box over here. Let me ask a few of them. I think the first one that came in was, does the enactment of AIA, the American Invents Act, impact a tech transfer office from filing a patent?
It's certainly something that we pay attention to, and we rely on expert guidance from attorneys such as Cedric, because our faculty, of course, are getting promoted and tenured as a result of sharing their knowledge early and often and broadly. And they go to meetings and they talk to students and they go to symposia and they talk to people on over dinner. Well, back when we used to get together at symposia and talk over dinner, right? And so all of that disclosure, I'm sure, would give Cedric heartburn. It gives me pause. And so these various publication bars and these use bars are something that are important, not only for a tech transfer office, but also for an inventor. So when when Cedric's inventors call him, these are the kinds of questions he asks, like, what have you done so far? What is the sweet spot in terms of what you want to claim, what's been disclosed, and what is the plan moving forward in terms of product development? Because you don't want to file a patent application too early, but you for sure don't want to file it too late. And there is a lot of different ways that it can be too late. And so paying attention to those dates associated with that America Invents Act is definitely key. But it's not
Spot on,
unique
Laura.
to the tech transfer office, every inventor.
Spot on, Laura.
Excellent response.
Yeah, I'd like to add that, in particular, the AIA made one major change to patent law. It was changing from a first to invent system to a first to file structure. And, Laura already alluded to it, but definitely knowing that you need to file early and often is going to be valuable. And if you get that information from a tech transfer office, I am super happy for you that you are now no longer thinking about that you have your conception and then you have to have your diligence and reduction to practice period of time. That is no longer the structure. People will still come to me and ask me, well, can I take my idea, write it in an envelope, mail it to myself, and then show that, okay, fine, that shows conception, but then how are you showing diligence along the way? That's not the standard anymore. The standard is who gets to the patent office first. And so you really want to be working with someone who is going to be able to give you that sort of advice and counsel. You don't want to be left out because you went ahead and publicly disclosed your invention, and then you thought that because you had been diligent during that time period, you were going to be able to still file at some later point. It's not the case anymore.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Here's an interesting question. Of course, it's COVID related. How is COVID affecting work with tech transfer offices and the use of labs and collaboration? That's a really, really good question.
It is a really good question, and we did actually talk about that a little ahead of time. So, it's been exciting. It's actually different than what I expected it to be. In my previous life as my own patent firm, I expected it to be a great slowdown in work, but it actually ended up being a lot of work initially, especially when the pandemic first hit. A lot of the PIs and the professors had time, things that they had on their docket of things to do, and they couldn't get in the lab, and they weren't teaching. And so there were a lot more applications drafted and filed during that period of time. Though I do think that, in talking to a number of professors and working with them, because there are restrictions, especially on the science side, for their graduate students to be in the lab, and they can't all be in the lab at the same time, and they socially distance, that in the future we may see slowdown in how research and development progresses, or how the grants are filled, or how invention disclosure forms are submitted and things of that nature, just because we're not getting as much data through. So it has been a bit different than what I expected it to be, and it could have a long lasting effect.
Absolutely. Laura?
It's definitely true that both there was an opportunity for people to sort of tidy up things they'd been meaning to pick up the phone and call me about as well, so that I could then pick up the phone and call patent counsel to say, hey, I've got some things in the hopper that I think we should move forward on. But it's also true, and to the questioner's point, they hit the nail on the head, which is that collaboration is a lot harder when you can't get together in the same space. So collaboration on my campus, where I might bring together, or the university might bring together people from different backgrounds, and those sort of tangential conversations that happen, and from, hey, I was working on a problem, and oh, I've been thinking about that, and that sort of fortuitous conversation doesn't necessarily happen as easily via Zoom. Some conversations don't happen at all via Zoom. And similarly, going to meetings, right? So the opportunity for my ag faculty, for example, Tanaga, to meet your researchers and talk about, hey, we've been working on this project, and how is that coming along? Those new collaborations have been challenged by the lack of engagement in that way, and it's had to be very intentional, and that can be hard sometimes. That being said, some of these early stage collaborations where people had already made those connectivities, I think they had a real opportunity to be intentional and to have the conversations. But again, that Zoom link had to be already set up, and those conversations started. There was more time to talk, but there wasn't necessarily an opportunity to bring more people into the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. I think you both responded to that question well. I think COVID has definitely disrupted, all that people are doing, but I think it's been both good and bad, right? It's slowing down the research, but it's also having folks join and commit. They get to sit down and write and think and, just collaborate and just, our lives are so busy. Generally, pre-COVID, we're moving about so much, but with the COVID, some of us are just kind of focus now. You can write those grants. You can write those SBIR applications. You can write those patent applications. You can actually get some help because you're sitting still. So I think it has been both good and bad, and only time will tell, exactly, what the result has been. But I think it hasn't impacted us too much. So I've got a couple more questions, and then I'll get back to some of the other questions. Okay, what would the perception be of approaching a university, federal lab, or industry partner having already filed the first patent, but wanting to collaborate on a continuation or CIP. So the research, the university already has its patent, the federal lab or the company, they've got their patent. They want to collaborate, obviously, to do some kind of improvement, do a continuation or CIP. How do you feel about that? What position does the inventor find themselves in when they're actually coming along as the continuation app or the CIP?
I would defer to Cedric on this, but I will say that universities want to be good partners, right? And one of the easiest ways to do that is to make sure that our agreements with our partners are laid out ahead of time, right? So it's much better when someone comes to us and says, okay, we want to partner. This is where the money's coming from. This is where the resources are coming from. This is what we think we're going to contribute. This is what we think we need from you. And this is how we're going to manage that IP. And absolutely, the universities, I'm sure everyone has even I do, has a range of ways that happens. And to Cedric's point earlier, it's based on some of the funding, it's based on some of the extent of collaboration, that relationship that we've had so far. Where is that? What is the university going to be contributing to that? But really addressing those problems, not problems, those opportunities, addressing those opportunities up front is, I think, really allays a lot of concerns, because we've already laid out sort of how the relationship's going to be structured. But I'm sure Cedric has more than one war story on this.
Go ahead, Cedric.
Oh, boy. Oh, yes. Thank you, Laura, for that intro. Because yes, I've worked on situations where we had a PI from one institution who just happened to go down to another institution, and they worked together on something. It worked, but there was no interinstitutional agreement in place. Then the whole patent realm started to, fall apart from there, because if you have multiple individuals who are working together on a similar invention and they all contribute to at least a portion of the claims, they're all inventors. Whether they are all working at the same institution, like what Laura was alluding to before about her institution and her employees having to assign to her university. But if you have, PIs from multiple universities working together and something works, how do you, divvy up the intellectual property from there? And our patent laws are not that favorable to having multiple inventions, because each inventor has their own ownership of that inventor. So it can make things a little challenging. So definitely having things drafted in the first place, making sure you do diligence. It's not exactly on point to where the question is talking about what's the perception of approaching the industry partner having already filed your first application, but wanting to collaborate on others. But making sure that you've done due diligence on either the person coming to industry or the industry doing, the person who's coming to industry doing due diligence on the industry partner as well. You want to make sure you have a good understanding of what their portfolio looks like. You want to make sure that if you're going to be doing additional applications, that you're not going to run into some space that either party already owns or a third party may own. So there's a lot that can go into that process, and definitely having the contracts be the driving force as to how that due diligence is done and the scope of it is very helpful. It's a great first step, is to make sure that before you even start with the collaboration, that you have a good understanding of the agreements that need to be in place. Some of those agreements may be like a confidentiality agreement, right? A memorandum of understanding. You can have things such as the material transfer agreement. There are a number of different forms, interinstitutional agreements we talked about before. There are a number of agreements that you can use to kind of lay out the scope of the collaboration, the work that you're doing together. And it definitely makes things easier moving forward.
Okay, so actually we have another question. I think I'm going to ask that before we go on to our next section, and that is, what are some of the items that have come from tech transfer in the market today? Basically, are there any products on the market that have actually come from universities, or of course private industry, right? But so let's go with university. Laura, can you give us any real A&T stories where you've gotten a product on the market? Something that people may be familiar with.
Unfortunately, we don't yet. We had a company that was working with us on a hypoallergenic peanut technology. Unfortunately, they weren't able to maintain their funding. So I was wildly excited to see it written up in the New York Magazine in terms of the opportunities, but that didn't necessarily translate to more money. Again, those bags of money. And so some of those technologies, particularly, and Cedric can speak to this from Eli Lilly, anything that's going to need FDA approval. Again, these are relatively complicated devices, medical devices, or heaven forbid, pharmaceuticals. Those need a lot of money. So way more than the bags of money that aren't in my office, like just stacks and stacks and stacks of money. And often those are the ones, there's a lot in the popular press in terms of drugs, and again, Cedric would know this better than I, that were developed and identified originally on a university campus, moved into a small company, that technology, and then taken over, bought out or licensed by a larger pharmaceutical company. And again, $1 billion maybe to take it into the marketplace. It's really crazy.
Yeah, so actually, there's a great resource, Autumn, the AUTM.net. So every year they put out a survey. I think it's called A Better World,
Yes.
where universities actually come up with these amazing innovations and they actually post them. So if you really want to know all of the really awesome innovations that have come out from universities, and they've been doing this for a long time, go there, autumn.net, check out A Better World, and you'll see the most relevant, most exciting inventions that have actually come out of universities that are relevant today. So that's one resource. Cedric, do you know of any other
I
ways,
do.
places?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, I don't know how much I could say. I mean, I'll go ahead and start with the disclaimer that these are my own comments and these are not the comments of Eli Lilly and company.
Okay.
But yes, as Laura alluded to, there are a number of pharmaceutical, products out in the marketplace that started off in universities and going through their tech transfer offices. Cialis is one that I can just think of top of my head, but I don't want to get in any trouble at work either. So, but you can definitely look up and see, you can see a lot of public documents, stuff that's not confidential in any way, shape, or form. Information about products that have come through tech transfer, especially if you just look for universities and any sort of industry affiliation.
Excellent, excellent. So Sean, I know we're getting close to the hour. How are we doing on time? Just a time check. I've got
We
plenty of
have
questions.
6 minutes remaining.
Okay, 6 minutes remaining. So I've got a couple more questions that I'd like to ask. And I think this one is probably one of the most important questions to ask. What can be done to position yourself to support commercialization of technology? Position yourself. Sometimes it's so important. Inventors are so focused on the thing. What about themselves? What can they do to get themselves in a position to hear what's being said and all of those things? So go ahead, Laura. Let's hear your thoughts.
I think being a successful entrepreneur, which I will say I am not, I still have a daytime job. And so this is maybe a do as I say, not as I do, right? But it is to hold a mirror up to yourself and to understand where your own strengths lie. And to recognize that, again, as Cedric had said earlier, one person isn't going to be able to do everything. So understand where your strengths lie, where your enthusiasm lies, and then identify sort of where you need additional support. And sometimes you can do that with a mirror, and that's hard to do. Sometimes it's by talking with trusted advisors, right? Be they family, be they friends, be they business mentors, be they an independent advisor at a business clinic who says, okay, look, like, your business plan is lacking X, Y, and Z, and it's doing really well at A, B, and C. You need to be able to hear that and then process it and think about, okay, like, what do I need to do to address what this hole was that maybe you didn't see yourself, because again, you were spending your time and your energy and your resources on building up A, B, and C. And so I do really think identifying sort of where your gaps are and then figuring out whether you can buy your way out of those gaps or barter your way out of those gaps or learn your way out of those gaps in terms of identifying resources, some of which are free, as we've talked about today, some of which, again, are going to cost money.
Excellent. And Cedric, how do we
Yeah,
position ourselves? Yes.
sure. One thing I'd like to add is, there's iQor, and I think one good aspect of talking about iQor is the thought that you're not going out there and saying, here's my solution, that you're doing customer discovery first. And it's going to require you to listen and to hear the problems of the people that are in your market. And just listen to what they have to say. And that way you can ensure that you're not so focused on, well, how can I explain what I'm doing and how can I show that this would address your problem and things of that nature, but that you really have the opportunity, just by doing this customer discovery, to listen and make sure that the problems that are out there are being heard. And then you can, like we talked about before, be very considerate and craft a very compelling message as to how your product or your service solves this problem. So definitely making sure to take the opportunity to hear, whether it's by doing customer discovery or at a pitch competition or something like that, is very valuable.
Oh, excellent. Excellent, excellent, excellent feedback. For those of you that know me, you know I love to leave people inspired and empowered to do and to reach their dreams. So in our last few minutes, I just want you to tell me just what's the one piece of advice that you would give the innovator when they were considering and thinking about what can I do to maximize and leverage my skills, my talent, my innovation to actually be successful? What is that one piece of advice you would give them, or an example or a story that you might have to share?
I'll start with a story. I did have a client back when I was a solo patent attorney, who started off just as a distributor for another medical device company. My client ended up coming up with their own line of products, and I assisted them with, patenting a hinge mechanism that allowed them to be able to differentiate between static and dynamic forces for the range of motion devices. And eventually they were acquired. It was a lot of work. It was a lot of years. It was not like an overnight success by any way, shape, or form, but they persevered and they made their way through the process and were able to get additional products onto the market that were very well received.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Acquired. Wow, that's a really big deal. All right, Laura.
And I would just reinforce what I just heard Cedric say, which is that entrepreneurship is hard, but inventing is hard, right? You've been able to take a problem that more than one person has experienced, and you've identified a solution to that, right? So that's not easy, but it's not the first hard thing you've done. And so entrepreneurship is also hard. And what I would totally recommend is celebrating the successes that you've achieved, right? The success is not hitting the grand slam home run and making hundreds of millions of dollars. That would be great. I wish that for all of you. However, Tanagi, you said at the start, what are the stepwise things that you get to, no one goes up right away and hits the grand slam home run. There's singles, there's doubles, there's getting in front of the right partners, there's having the right conversation, there's getting an introduction to the next person, there's running into someone, again, when we get to run into people at the coffee shop, who may be a great CEO or a great CFO for your company. It's identifying those resources, getting plugged into a community that can be supportive of you. It's getting an infusion of cash, again, maybe not bags of it, but the right money. Again, that's people affirming their belief in the work that you're doing and the opportunity that's available. And I would just encourage you to celebrate each step along the way. Those are all successes.
Oh my goodness, I love that advice. And I definitely believe in celebrating successes. I mean, like you said, it's not going to come overnight, and you need that as your fuel to keep you going. So, Cedric and Laura, thank you guys. You're amazing. You're amazing panelists. I know you're both connected on LinkedIn. So, if folks in the audience would like to connect with Laura and Cedric, you can find them on LinkedIn. Sean, I see you're here, and so I think that's about all we have. I'd like to give a round of applause for the panelists. They've done a great job, and for the audience for asking such amazing questions.
Thank you, Tanaga, Laura, and Cedric. Thank you for connecting us to resources and information about tech transfer and demystifying the process. With that, I will ask you to go ahead and turn off your cameras, and we are going to close out our day. This panel does conclude day 2 of InventionCon. Just so you all know, we will be sending a survey at the end of the program on Friday to get your feedback and any suggestions you may have for InventionCon. So keep an eye out for an email coming from inventioncon@uspto.gov. Thank you for being with us today. Be sure to join us tomorrow at 12 for our final day of programming and to get more insight on how to capitalize on your intellectual property.